Hi, Julie. For
Hi,
everyone who's
Karen.
here, this is Julie. She is works at Reader Services in High Point at the public library there, and she's currently my supervisor for my capstone. So I'm gonna just say that High Point Public Library is a great place to think of when you're doing your capstone if you're in the area. And she's just gonna talk a little bit to us about how she became a librarian and like what she's done since starting. And she's available for any questions at the end or perhaps throughout if you want to use the chat. All right. Thank you, Julie.
Sure. Um, where to get started? I have a few images that will help tell my story a little bit along the way, but I won't go into those yet. I guess I'll start at the beginning, which is how long have I been a librarian? Which is a good question. Which is, I suppose I have been in High Point, it will be 15 years in April. And then before I was in High Point, I was the branch manager of the King Public Library, which is a little north of Winston-Salem in Stokes County. And I did that for 7 years. And that was a very different type of, that was a regional system. There was a 4-county area. It was the Northwestern Regional Library System, and there were 13 branches in that system. So it was a slightly different thing. Whereas High Point is a municipal library. So we are in Guilford County and we have a relationship with the Greensboro Public Library System, but we are we are our own library. And we really don't have branches. It's just the one main location. We have some offsite locations for pickup and drop off and that kind of thing. So, but I was going to talk a little bit about my journey because everybody seems to have a journey to librarianship. I hear a lot of folks talk about how they didn't first think that they would be a librarian when they were growing up. That wasn't their first career path. So many people came into it elsewhere from having done other things first. So let me share a few things with you. And definitely, as you have questions, ask along the way, and we'll see about getting answers to those as well. So here we are. You see in the blue screen with my name and everything. So here's my contact information. I work at the High Point Public Library in the Readers Services area, which mainly is made up of adult fiction, young adult fiction and nonfiction, our DVD and audiobook collections, which we call our non-print collections. And I am also what I've given myself the title of the facilitator of digital download programs and services, which is a mouthful. But basically what it means is I manage the ebook and audiobook collections for the library, which includes collection development, marketing, training both the staff and the public on using all the various and sundry digital services that we have. So that's kind of what I do. I am you'll see in a minute, but I'm a 2-time graduate from UNCG. I got my undergraduate degree in psychology in 1994, and I completed my MLIS in 2004. So that tells you that in between there, I didn't go straight from undergraduate to graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up with my psychology degree. I realized pretty quickly I didn't want to go into private practice, and that wasn't quite for me. But I felt like the skills that I gained from that degree would suit me in a lot of different areas, whatever I chose to do. So here we go. So how did I really get started? So, at least when I was a kid, and I don't know how many of you, were the play pretend, which we did a lot. I'm going to date myself a bit here as we talk through this, but This is a collection of books that were mine from childhood. And one of the things that I did for fun with my friends is we would play school. And, you know, there'd be the teacher, the music teacher, and the art teacher. But I was always the librarian when we played school. You know, that's what I wanted to be when we were playing school. So I took it to another level. And I don't know if you can tell, but I have written in the little call numbers on these books. This is my, you know, 8, 9-year-old handwriting here on the side. It's kind of hard to tell. And I would file my books alphabetically by author on my shelves. And I went so far as to make up these little cards, as you can see in the second picture. Yes, I have no idea what that means, what's on that card. It's kind of hard to see. But anyway, but from this, I had no idea I would end up being a librarian, even though I had gone to the trouble to do all this. My mother thinks it's the best story ever. So anyway, so moving along from there. So I'm in elementary school, and this is what I did a lot of. My best friend and I, we would trade off Nancy Drew books. So we read a lot of Nancy Drew. So I was quite a reader as I was growing up, which came and went as you get into high school and college. I sort of pulled away from pleasure reading because there was so much other reading you have to do, and that's one of those things that happens to everybody, I guess. But yeah, it's loved the Nancy Drews. So moving on, I'm gonna jump to this. That was from about 3rd, 4th grade range. So here's 6th grade. So I remember vividly in computer class in the 6th grade, we learned basic programming on the Apple IIe computer. And so that's what this is. This is sort of what looks like the computer that I learned basic programming on. This will come into play later, is why this is important. So, you know, that was part of 6th, and also in 6th grade, I recall having a really good school librarian, and she taught us study skills and research skills, which are things that, of course, students should learn and should know about later on. So we'll jump again ahead a little bit. We're going to go to starting out in my undergraduate degree. This fine institution, I know you will recognize this building. It looks a little bit different now than it did back in 1990 when I arrived on UNCG's campus for the first time. But I spent much time in there in the stacks, looking through the bound journals, because when I started, they didn't have the electronic databases that we have now. So that's what I spent a lot of my time doing, was looking in the stacks. And so there is my start into UNCG. So I was an English minor, by the way. I was a psych major and English minor. So moving along. So in the midst of college, I could not find a good picture of it, but I obviously have lived in the Greensboro High Point area since I started at UNCG. And I got a part-time job my junior year at an independent bookstore in Four Seasons Mall called Will's Bookstore. And it no longer is in existence. It was bought out by Books A Million when all the big bookstores came in. But it was a wonderful place to sort of learn about books. I have this sort of message here because it applies to a lot in my life, especially throughout my career. I have found myself where put into situations that I didn't necessarily choose for myself, but I was able to really embrace the situation, embrace the opportunity, and I feel like at least bloom a little bit each time I was put into a new situation. So while I was at Will's Bookstore, after I finished college, I went full-time, and then I became an assistant manager for a little while, which is a different thing than just working in the bookstore part-time. So got some definite customer service skills that way, got some money handling skills, which are sometimes handy in the library, not as much anymore. But I really, and just learned a lot about books and how the book industry worked, how publishing worked, just on a basic level. So that was very useful for that part of my learning process. I then took a job working for a company in Greensboro that worked with real estate agents, and they made their listing books. So they had, I don't know, nowadays it's all online, but if you pull up a real estate listing, it lists out all the different attributes of the different houses. It has pictures. So at the time when I started working there, in about 1996 is when I started working there, I was working with real estate agents to design their pages. And I was sort of the frontline person working with them, designing their pages, and I had to work in DOS. So this was the next step up from the Apple IIe basic programming. I was doing some DOS-based, it wasn't full-out programming, but I was working in DOS to make those books. And I did work with computer programmers that were part of the company. And that was a unique experience at times, because sometimes they did not speak anything but just computer language. So, and they were frustrated if you didn't understand their computer language all the way. And they can be quirky individuals to work with, but usually you can at least find one that will remember to, turn it back into layman's terms, and so the average person can understand it. So I worked with this company for about 3 years, and I was really ready for a change. And my husband was also looking for a change. My husband I was hoping to pull a picture in here of us at Will's Bookstore. That's where we met. But anyway, he is currently the chair of the art and graphic design department at High Point University. So he's an artist. So we were trying to find, jobs for both of us. And he was about to start into his graduate school work. And we were ready to, buy our first home. So he had some friends that lived in Stokes County. And so we went out to look at Stokes County, and long story short, we moved to Stokes County, and I was looking for a job where I didn't have to commute to Greensboro, because this company I'd worked for was in Greensboro. So he happened to go into the public library one day, and it turns out they were looking for a branch manager. And I said, so he came home with the job ad, and I said, I can't apply. You have to have a master's degree to be a branch manager. He said, not for this one. So in Stokes County, they were looking for somebody who had a bachelor's degree and with book experience. So I qualified for both, I felt like, and I was lucky enough to be hired as the branch manager of the King Library in 1999. So that was an exciting time, because number one, the commute was much better, and it was a new adventure for me. It was going to be fun coming back to books, because it had been a while. I will say that my start there was a little bit memorable, because I started on the first day of their summer reading program in 1999. And it had been a long time since I had been around children and books. So I kind of jumped in feet first into that, and enjoyed every minute of it, and had lots of great experiences there. I will say that one of the things that I learned early on with this job was the importance of finding mentors. There were several of the other branch librarians that kind of took me under their wing and showed me the ropes a little bit. And that was important, because there was a lot about public libraries that I didn't know, especially working with the governmental part of that, which is you'll have a board that you work with. We had a board of trustees that was more of an advisory board there. They didn't make any decisions. And then there was a regional board that was more of a decision-making board. But anyway, you also had to work with the local government. So I got to know the city manager in King really well. And that was important because I would go, several times a year and make presentations at city council meetings. Another new skill that you get to do when you're working in the public library world is work with boards and city management. And that was mostly great. I was lucky enough to have a city manager that was very supportive of the public library. And he was, it was an easy group to present in front of, because the other thing that's great about public libraries is, in general, people are in favor, they support the idea of the public library. Now, they may think of it as the way that they remember it from their childhood, which is you walk in and nobody talks and the librarian shushes people all the time, which was not, in fact, the way that this particular library was run. Of course, there were times when it was quiet, but there were other times during the summer, especially, kids were everywhere and they were chatting and talking about the books and, so it wasn't exactly that quiet sanctuary spot that those folks were used to. But in general, city government was very supportive of the library and the plans that we had and the financial requests that we would make from time to time. I also got my first experiences with working with teens. There was a small group of teens that we worked with during the summer. They also came and volunteered during the summer, so that helped out a lot because this was a staff of 6 and we did everything. So everybody was working at the circulation desk. Everybody was doing programs. Everybody was, shelf reading and straightening and weeding and all those things. Everybody took part in that process. I had an assistant manager who managed the children's programs, which was at the time when I started there, that was the heart of that library, was the children's programs. And we eventually added in a friends group and some other things to appeal to the adults as well. We also, this was another step in my technology journey. We were the recipients of some computers and a printer and some other equipment from the Gates Foundation, because in the early 2000s, they had a campaign to support public libraries in rural communities. And King definitely fit that. Stokes County is a very rural area. And the nice thing about these computers is they sent the computers to us and they sent a trainer from Microsoft to come and help us learn how to work the printer and the network, the computers, and I soaked that up. She was with us for 2.5 days, and I basically said, "Are you sure you have to leave?" at the end of that time, because I really was learning so much from her. So that was yet another step in my journey to library technology. I also, during that time, I, really picked that up quickly, I felt, and I was asked to be on the technology committee for the regional system, which was a fun group of people. One of whom actually is now working in the tech services department at Jackson Library. Her name is Marcy Burton. So if you know Marcy, you can tell her I said hi. And she and I had a good time on that technology committee. And I also did things like toddler story time, so you have to do things that you have to do because everybody's working in the library all at once. So I've been at the library about 3 or 4 years, and my branch manager, my assistant, looked at me and she said, you really should get a library degree. You really should. You need to do that. So thinking about it, and realizing that I had a few years under my belt that maybe I would think about doing that. And sure enough, I enrolled in UNCG's MLIS program in 2003 and or 2002, I guess, and started out gradually because I was continuing to work full time. And so I was taking a class or two at a time. And so we were going along pretty well with it. So I guess it was 2003 when I started. And then lo and behold, I find out I'm expecting. So I have to speed up a little bit. And I started in January of 2003. And I went and worked through that, went to school through that summer. And then into the following year. And I found out in February that I was going to have a baby in November. And I knew I was going to try to graduate that December. So anyway, also fast forward a little bit, the graduate degree was not nearly as exciting of an event of the birth of this cute little gal who happened in November. And the nice thing was I was taking Dr. Carmichael's reference class as my last class. And I really was only in class about 2 months. So he let me work from home for the rest of the time. And anyway, so ta-da, I have a library degree. So and I have a little girl, Amelia. And so here I am with this new baby and trying to get back to work and realizing that, once again, I have this library degree. There may be some other things that I could do with it. And it was within about 2 years. Well, I guess the next year, I'll jump to this one. I was encouraged to sign up for NCLA's Leadership Institute. And I did. And that was one of those experiences, once again, where it sort of reinforced the idea that there were other things I could be doing with myself besides working in this small rural library. And so then I started thinking about what I might want to try to do next. I also benefited greatly from mentorship from some great folks at that time who were a part of that. Haven't really kept in touch with a whole lot of them, honestly, but it really made a mark on me, made an impression on me. So once again, I'm going to jump a little bit. So about 6 months later, my husband, who had been working about 5 different adjunct teaching jobs, teaching art, was offered a full-time position at High Point University in their art department. So we were still living in King. And so we quickly decide to, he obviously takes that job. And then I start looking in the High Point, Greensboro area. And in early 2006, I saw a job ad for a research supervisor position at the High Point Public Library. I jump on that and I am interviewed and I am accepted for that position. So here we go. Jumping a little bit into this. So this is where I landed and this is where I still am. However, my first role here in High Point was as the business librarian, which is not something I had done before. So once again, I am going to try to bloom where I'm planted. And I learned very quickly that you can learn a lot from the folks that are around you. So I spent a lot of time learning from the other folks that dealt with business journals, the databases, Value Line and Reference USA and those kinds of things. And I got really involved. They wanted me to do some outreach with the business community. So I got to know the Chamber of Commerce in High Point and got involved with them and participated in their, most communities have some kind of a leadership program through their Chamber of Commerce. And I participated in High Points in, I think that was 2013, maybe not, maybe 2007. Anyway, somewhere in there. It's a blur. And enjoyed that a lot. Got to make some really great local connections, which was also something that I realized is important in librarianship, is connecting with your community. And that's the first time I really got to do that. I did that in King a lot. Just being a branch manager, I was sort of the quote unquote face of the library. And it was a small community in King. And so I spent a lot of time, having people stop me in the grocery store and ask me questions about when was such and such book coming out. So, I got those kinds of things, which was fine. It was frustrating when you've been working in the yard all morning and you go to the grocery store and you're in your, sweaty, dirty clothes, and there's the person wanting to know about books. I'm like, oh, this is not the best time. But anyway, I had a good time kind of learning about how to get to know a community. And at High Point, I had that opportunity as well. I was just learning specifically the business community in High Point. And I did that for my first 3 years in High Point. And then I was given the opportunity to switch into basically what turned into the role that I have now, which is to move from the reference area of the library into more of the Readers Advisory Adult Services area of the library. And that's what I've been doing ever since. In that role, you get to do lots of different kinds of things. And like I said, my supervisor at the time gave me the job of learning the digital collections, because at that time it was not very highly used. This was 2009, end of 2009, beginning of 2010. And it wouldn't be until a year later or so, when the iPads came out, that the digital collections were going to really take off. And boy, did they. So we had a lot of learning to do. I spent a lot of time talking about strategy on how to go about it. And my supervisor was really smart about, kind of finding our way into it. And we started out by talking to the public about, okay, so you want to get one of these devices, which one should you get? Depending on what they wanted to do, what their price range was. So we started that way, and gradually we started doing what so many public libraries did and are still doing, which is offering classes on how to get ebooks. So I spent a lot of time teaching myself how to do this. And after I did that, we purchased, a whole bunch of different devices, and we kind of shared them among our staff to make sure everybody on staff was at least comfortable using the devices, because there were going to be questions of everybody on at least, the basics on how to use them. And then there were a key, 3 or 4 people that I trained to work with people one-on-one and do the troubleshooting, that kind of thing. All at the same time, I was trying to get a handle on, how to build these collections, how to market the collections, and all those things, and what were other libraries doing, and how all this was going to work in reference to our print collection. And we had a lot of books on CD, so how was all this going to play in with all that? And I always kind of thought of it as, the ebooks are just an alternative. It's another way to read. It's not going to replace anything. It's just one more way to do it. And so that became sort of our general philosophy going forward. And in the midst of all that, I'm still, working with the adult services, I'm working the desk. I have 3 people that I supervise. So I have 3, right now I have 3 full-time library associates that I'm supervising, but sometimes I had part-time people. And so there's that part of it too, that you have the aspect of library work where you're working with the community, you're working with the public. And my boss stressed, that we should, all of us, make it our goal to offer the best customer service that we can. That was something that, and that still is something that she thinks is probably one of the most important things you can do. And that was right along the way I had always thought about it is, you should offer the same great service to every person that comes in the door. That's what the library mission is, and try to get the most accurate information to them the best that you can. And so I guess a couple of years ago, I had been working with several staff members that were in different areas of the library, teaching them about the ebooks, and a very kind co-worker who I had mentored a little bit nominated me for an honors award, which is with the city department. They honor city employees who have gone out of their way to help our neighbors overcome real situations. So she wrote up this very nice a narrative about the ways that I had helped her kind of learn about the digital collections and the way I helped the public. And sure enough, I was honored to receive the honors award several years ago. So that was because I had put so much of an emphasis on mentoring and trying to do a really good job of communicating with the public, educating the public about the digital collections. So that was a definite high point for me. No pun intended there. And the other fun thing about working in Reader Services, you'll see the picture on the left, is working with authors. So getting to know authors. So here I am this is Susanna Kearsley. If you are a historical fiction reader, you may know the name. If you don't know the name, you should. She writes sort of the time slip historical fiction. I fell in love with her books, and we've actually had her in High Point to do book tours 3 times now. And that was her 2nd time coming. And this past summer, she did one virtually with some co-authors. They did an anthology together. But anyway, she and I became friends, which is something that you get to do when you're working in the library world, is you get to know authors, because yes, they are people too. And she and I just really hit it off, and also a definite honor of mine. She's also friends with Diana Gabaldon, which probably a name that most folks recognize, but hearing her stories about working with Diana were awfully fun as well. So, and moving ahead just a little bit, so this is my final kind of piece. So as part of working with the digital and technology services at the library, one of the main digital collections that we have is through Overdrive, and they have this users group conference every other year, and I got to go, and I learned a whole lot, met a lot of people from other libraries, and we were all working with the Overdrive digital collections. I'm ended up being on the executive committee for our Overdrive consortium in the state, which is the North Carolina Digital Library. So I work sort of on the steering committee for that organization, which trying to manage the collections and work with 24 member libraries is a bit of a challenge, but it's a lot of fun as well. And I've learned a lot from the people in that group and from other groups that I've been a part of. Also about that time, I got involved with NCLA in a more significant way, and I was invited to serve on the Technology and Trends Committee back in 2013. And served first as the secretary treasurer for that section of NCLA and moved up to vice chair and then chair. So I spent about 5 years on that, in that section. And pretty much after that, got to meet another prominent person in library technology. You see the picture on the right, fellow by the name of David Lee King, and he works for the Topeka Shawnee Library System in Kansas, and he is their technology person, and he is a tremendous expert, really easygoing guy, and he taught a course on technology trends, which I took, and I always recommend that to folks. If you see his name and you see a course on technology trends, and if you're interested in that, I would recommend that you take it, because he has his finger on the pulse of technology in libraries, because he works in libraries and he understands the way that the newest technology, the emerging technologies can work in libraries. Through technology and trends, we were able to bring him to North Carolina. And you see there are 3 different locations he came to. So that was a lot of fun. That was back in 2019. 2018 seems like a long time ago, but it really wasn't, even though this year has seemed like 2. So anyway, it does seem like a long time ago now. But anyway, and when I rotated off out of my chair position with technology and trends, back in 2019, I was elected as secretary for NCLA. So that's what I'm doing now. I continue to serve on the steering committee for the Overdrive, the North Carolina Digital Library Consortium. I continue to train my coworkers on the digital collections that we have. I continue to work with the public and to promote the digital collections on social media and all the different ways that we promote things now. I guess sort of to tie everything up, the things that were the most important to me in pursuing this journey, because obviously it's been a journey, is remembering that you really have to be flexible and be able to bloom where you're planted, as they say. You'll want to be able to listen. Active listening skills are key when you're working in any kind of a library. That's something that I gained from my psychology background. Also, customer service I gained from working in retail, which is the ultimate of all customer service experiences. Once you've survived that, you can survive pretty much any interaction with the library patron that you could ever have. Mostly just listening. And my goal is always, if I have someone that approaches the service desk and is upset, I try to do a whole lot of listening. And my goal is to have them leave my desk after talking with me a happier person than when they arrived. So if I can get them smiling, that's a plus. But as long as they are happier, that's the goal. I presented all kinds of different technology experiences I had as something that was important to where I am now, because libraries and technology go hand in hand. So I truly believe that the more background that you can have in technology, and even if you don't think it's all that significant, like that class I took back in the 6th grade working on the Apple IIes, every technology experience you have is going to help you along the way. And, you know, being able to work with different age groups is good, especially if you're going to be thinking about public libraries. Volunteering in libraries is a great idea. Something that I didn't even think about doing in high school because I had other things I was doing, but that is something to definitely think about, is if you don't have a position right away, that's okay. Hopefully there's a way that you can make ends meet, but if you have an opportunity to volunteer in a public library, an academic library, any kind of library, that counts as library experience, at least in the library where I am. I know of at least 5 people that started out as volunteers at the High Point Library and were then hired as employees. Now they, certainly you had to, there's a certain caliber of person that you're looking for. But that's something that we did look for, is volunteers that were dedicated and interested. And actually 2 of them work in my area now and they're full-time. And another one is part-time, but he's still finishing up his undergraduate degree. And otherwise he would probably be full-time as well. So anyway, the last slide is just my contact information again. So I'll put that back up there. All this to say is, the other thing I wanted to talk about is to embrace the leadership opportunities, because there's lots of different ways to be a leader, especially in a public library setting. You don't have to be a supervisor like I am to be a leader. I worked with a lot of coworkers when I was working as a business librarian, and several of them are, library associates, and they had enough expertise in certain areas that they kind of rose to informal leadership positions in the library, even though they don't have to, and actually sometimes that's preferable not to have to supervise people, because that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that anybody can be, encouraged to pursue leadership opportunities. Leadership Institute with NCLA is a great opportunity to think about. Getting involved in NCLA is a great thing to think about. They have a new members roundtable section that works directly with library school students and new professionals. So I would highly encourage you to consider getting involved with that. Organizations like LISSA is another great way to test out your leadership skills. And I think that's in terms of all I wanted to talk about. That's about it, but I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing now and stop talking for a few minutes and let some of you all talk as well.
Thank you, Julie. I learned a lot. You have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. It's always interesting to hear like how people do end up like working in a library, because it never seems to go like, oh, I went to undergrad, then I went to grad school, then I became a librarian.
It's rarely linear. I had a really good friend in graduate school that started out in banking, and she hated it. So she became a public library director and has since retired. But you can come at it from any discipline and make a success of it. I also found that going to library school and working full-time at the same time helped me in my job, because I was able to cater my projects and my papers on topics that I was currently working on. So it was sort of a win-win for me. I remember vividly the paper on fair use copyright issues that I did in my collection development class. And that was a topic we were talking about in my library at the time, was, what do we do if somebody wants to try to copy a whole book on the copy machine? And what do we do about, we want to show movies at the library. How do we go about doing that? So I explored all of the fair use stuff with copyrights at that time, and it was very helpful. So.
You kind of already, I'm glad you mentioned NCLA, because I was going to ask you about networking, since I know you're involved in a lot of things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where right place, right time is how I got started with at least my current NCLA journey. But I really think that when I was in King and I was encouraged to apply for the Leadership Institute, that was a huge turning point for me. I didn't talk a whole lot about exactly why, but I could go ahead and say that I had got to the point in King I had come back from my maternity leave and I wasn't planning on making any major changes, but I was feeling honestly a little burnt out because I felt like there were a lot of the goals that I had for that library that I felt like I had done the best I could to accomplish. And there were other things that at least our advisory board was wanting us to pursue that I wasn't interested in. For example, the library building in King was a relatively new building, and the advisory board was interested in adding on to the building, which was part of the design of the building in the first place, but I just wasn't interested in participating in helping to manage a building project. So that was one of the reasons that I decided to start looking, honestly. And the fact that my husband was offered a full-time position at High Point University was a good reason, was an acceptable reason for me to look as well. And like I said, getting on at High Point was a huge, it just sort of, it was meant to be. So, and from being in High Point, when I was asked to get involved with, I've always been in NCLA in one way or another. But I wasn't real active. I hadn't done any presentations. I hadn't really joined any of the sections, but I'd always attended the conference, at least for a day. I enjoyed doing that. And then when I got involved with the digital collections, and my director came and asked me if I wanted to join the board for the Technology and Trends Committee, they were starting to, that one had been dormant for a little while, and they were starting to, they had a good leader chosen or had offered to start that push to get it back moving again. And I was I was glad, grateful, honored to be a part of that effort. And, there were several good folks, one of whom you may know, Jenny Dale, was part of that first group. So she, Kathy Shields was the chair at the time, and she's now at Wake Forest Library, and myself were the officers in that first group, getting it back launched. And so that was a fun process. So, the other part about networking is obviously, by the time I had gotten to High Point, I had been working in libraries in North Carolina for some time, and you just get to know people as you work in libraries. And so it was sort of like a mini reunion when you go to the conference and you see all these people that you haven't seen in a while, and you get to catch up with them. And, one thing leads to another, and this person introduces you to that person, and then you get, opportunities to partner in different ways. Always take those opportunities, even if you don't really know if they're going to fit. Always at least explore the partnership opportunities that you're given. And now, since I've been able to serve in some leadership roles, I have an even wider network through just all of the work that I've done. And, it's sort of, the more you do, the more your network grows. And also I would encourage you just to keep an open mind about what you're going to be doing. When I was hired in High Point, I was hired as the business librarian. Didn't know anything much about it, but after I got into it, I realized it wasn't a whole lot different than any other type of librarianship, except every once in a while they would ask questions about doing market research and investing materials. But if you're a librarian, you know how to direct people to materials. And fortunately for me, there were other people that understood the market research. So I could, refer people to other people that were experts. And that's another thing, is no matter what library you work in, get to know your coworkers and get to know what their interest areas are and their strengths are, because that is always going to help. Is if you have a question that comes up and you know that your coworker in the other room is a better person to answer the question, don't ever hesitate to refer. I mean, that's what it's all about. I think that in general, librarians are a very generous group of people. It's a very, as a profession, just by its nature, it's a very diverse, and it's a very accepting profession. And, you know, people want to help each other. And I really enjoy that about librarianship. You know, it's different than, you know, working in a bookstore. You have to worry about, you know, are the monthly sales goals being met? It's not about sales goals. It's about, are you working together to benefit the community? Are you working to help the people in the community get the information they need? So yes, networking is important, and CLI is